Emily had never cared much about seating preferences on flights. For her, a plane was simply a means to an end, a way to cross the country between deadlines and obligations. At that evening, as she settled into row 14 on the flight from Denver to Boston, something about the seat felt oddly comforting. She had chosen the window, not because she liked staring at the clouds, but because she needed the illusion of privacy. The narrow oval frame of sky outside gave her something to lean against, something to shield her from the crowded aisle. The week had drained her. Meetings stacked on meetings, deadlines stretching late into the night, and the kind of artificial cheerfulness demanded by corporate life. She had powered through it all on caffeine, adrenaline, and sheer stubbornness. But the crash had come the moment she boarded the plane. Now, with the seatbelt fastened low across her hips, Emily felt the exhaustion seep into her bones. The hum of the engines, constant and low, was like a lullaby. She closed her eyes briefly, picturing the soft bed waiting for her back home. Just a few more hours, and she'd be in Boston. A cab ride, a shower, then sleep. It was all she wanted. The cabin was still buzzing, with the small rituals of departure overhead bins slamming, seatbelts snapping, whispered complaints about legroom. Somewhere behind her, a child was asking endless questions about when the plane would fly higher than the birds. Emily smiled faintly. That restless curiosity reminded her of herself at that age. She remembered sitting beside her father in a small Cessna, peppering him with questions about every dial, every switch, every strange sound the plane made. He'd answered patiently, letting her rest her hands on the yoke for a few minutes while he guided them over the fields of Pennsylvania. Back then, flying had felt like magic. Now it was routine. The romance of flight had been replaced by security lines, cramped seats, and recycled air. Emily adjusted the thin airline pillow against the window, preparing to surrender to sleep. And then it came the voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain said, his tone sharper than the usual rehearsed cheer. "If there is a licensed pilot on board, please identify yourself immediately." The words cut through the hum of the cabin like a blade. Emily's eyes flew open. Around her, conversations died mid-sentence. A soda can hissed open somewhere, its fizz suddenly obscene in the silence. The businessman across the aisle lowered his newspaper slowly, as if reluctant to believe he had heard correctly. The captain's voice returned, this time more urgent. "This is a priority request. If you are a licensed pilot, please alert a flight attendant now." Whispers began. Nervous, hushed, frantic. What did he say? He needs another pilot? Is this a joke? Oh God, what's happening? The flight attendants moved quickly, their professional smiles replaced by strained urgency. They repeated the captain's call, scanning faces row by row. "Ladies and gentlemen, if anyone here is a licensed pilot, please let us know right away." No one moved. Emily's skin prickled. She sat rigid in her seat, pulse hammering in her ears. This wasn't a drill, wasn't some weird announcement. Something was wrong in the cockpit. Something serious enough that the captain had broken every rule of passenger composure to beg for help. Her mind raced with possibilities. A sudden illness? An incapacitated co-pilot? Mechanical failure? The businessman across the aisle muttered. "This isn't real. Stuff like this doesn't happen in real life." His voice cracked as he said it, betraying the fear behind the words. 2 rows ahead, a woman clutched her daughter's hand so tightly the girl whimpered. A young man in a hoodie laughed nervously, shaking his head. "Come on, there's got to be someone." There's always someone. But still, no one stood. Emily felt her stomach knot. The silence in response to the call was deafening. Hundreds of people packed into this aircraft, yet not one raised their hand. And that was when her thoughts betrayed her. "You know something about flying." The idea flashed across her mind uninvited. She shoved it away, trying to drown it under. Reason. She wasn't licensed. She wasn't qualified. What could she possibly do in the cockpit of a massive commercial jet? Yet her memory stirred. She thought of her father, his calm voice guiding her through stalls and turns. She thought of the smell of aviation fuel, the feel of the yoke vibrating under her hands. She thought of long summer afternoons on small airstrips, where the sound of propellers filled the air and every horizon felt within reach. She hadn't flown in years, hadn't even touched a cockpit, but some of it, maybe more than she wanted to admit, was still buried inside her. The captain's words replayed in her mind. If there is a licensed pilot on board, please identify yourself immediately. Licensed. She wasn't, but she wasn't completely helpless either. Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry. She glanced around. Dozens of faces stared blankly, waiting for anyone to save them from whatever nightmare was unfolding up front. Still, no one moved. The flight attendants repeated the call again, louder this time, urgency cracking through their voices. One of them locked eyes with Emily. For half a second, searching, pleading. Emily quickly looked away, heat rising in her chest. Her hands trembled on the armrest. Her rational mind screamed at her to stay put, to let someone else, someone qualified, step forward. But her gut twisted with a different truth. There might not be anyone else. The silence in the cabin was no longer just unsettling. It was terrifying. The engines droned on, steady and indifferent, carrying 200 strangers through the night sky. But inside row 14, Emily's heart pounded loud enough that she swore others could hear it. For the first time in her life, she wished her brother were sitting beside her. He was the real pilot in the family, an Air Force captain with thousands of hours logged. He would have stood immediately, calm and certain. He would have known what to do. But he wasn't here. She was. And the captain's plea still echoed in her head. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, forcing a deep breath into her lungs. She could almost hear her father's voice, steady and patient. Trust yourself. Trust the plane. Her seatbelt pressed into her waist, holding her in place like an anchor. If she stayed here, she could remain anonymous, one more frightened passenger. In row 14, if she stood, she would cross a line into something she wasn't sure she could survive. But one thought silenced all the others, rising above the fear like a beacon. Doing nothing is also a choice. And if no one else answered that call, doing nothing might cost every person on this plane their life. The silence pressed on the cabin like a physical weight. Even the engines, steady as always, seemed to fade beneath the collective thrum of fear. People craned their necks, searching the rows as if a hidden pilot might materialize, someone who could banish the danger with a confident smile and a steady walk toward the cockpit. But no one stood. Emily sat rigid in row 14, her knuckles pale against the armrest. She could feel every second ticking past, every moment of hesitation stretching into something more dangerous. The flight attendants moved quickly, though their polished calm had cracked at the edges. "Ladies and gentlemen," one of them said, her voice carrying down the aisle, "please, if you are a licensed pilot or have flight experience of any kind, we need you to come forward immediately." No one moved. The businessman across from Emily muttered again, this time louder, as if speaking the words would make them true. "This can't be happening. This stuff doesn't happen. It's a prank, has to be." But his voice betrayed him, rising too high, shaky with disbelief. A teenager behind Emily whispered, "Mom, what's going on?" Her mother shushed her quickly, though her own face was ashen. Emily shifted, restless, her thoughts at war. She wasn't licensed. She didn't belong in that cockpit. And yet, memories gnawed at her. She could see her father's hands on the yoke, hear his voice explaining lift and drag, stall speed, the way to keep steady when turbulence tried to rattle nerves apart. Those lessons had been her childhood, almost forgotten until now. But tonight, in this sky thousands of feet above the earth, they surged back with startling clarity. Still, her rational side fought back. A Boeing was not a two-seat Cessna. A cockpit like that would be crammed with instruments, screens, switches she had never seen before. What could she really offer besides distraction? Her heart thudded painfully. She told herself someone else would rise. There had to be a pilot somewhere on board. A commercial jet was like a small city in the air. Surely one among the passengers had the training, the license, the courage. But the silence lingered. One of the flight attendants passed near row 14, her eyes darting across faces, searching. She paused briefly, her gaze catching Emily's for a fraction of a second. In that instant, Emily felt the weight of expectation, the unspoken plea. She looked away, cheeks hot with guilt. The businessman snapped at the attendant, his fear twisting into anger. "Why are you asking us? Where's the captain? Isn't that his job?" The attendant's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't answer. Her silence said enough. Something was wrong, very wrong up front. Emily's pulse pounded harder. She thought of her brother again, stationed somewhere overseas, training others to handle combat aircraft. He would have been the first to volunteer, steady and fearless. She imagined him laughing at her hesitation. "You're the one in the seat, Em, not me. What are you going to do?" She closed her eyes, drew a breath, and let it out slowly. Fear clawed at her, but beneath it was something stronger: responsibility. If no one else answered, then the call was hers. Her hands shook as she unbuckled her seatbelt. The click of the buckle seemed thunderous in the hush. Heads turned immediately. Passengers stared at her with wide eyes, some hopeful, others doubtful. Emily swallowed hard and stood. Her voice faltered, barely audible. She forced herself louder. "I'm not licensed, but I've had training. I've flown small aircraft." For a moment, there was only silence. Then the closest flight. Attendant's face lit with a mix of relief and urgency. "Come with me," she said quickly, almost pleading. The businessman scoffed, half rising from his seat. "Are you serious? She's not a pilot." She said it herself, but the attendant ignored him. She gestured firmly for Emily to follow. Emily's legs trembled as she stepped into the aisle. Every pair of eyes seemed to track her, their stares heavy with expectation and desperation. A child whispered, "She's going to save us," and the words nearly undid her. Save them? She didn't even know if she could save herself. The walk toward the front of the plane felt endless. Passengers shifted in their seats to watch her pass, some nodding encouragement, others whispering doubt. Emily kept her gaze forward, fighting the urge to collapse back into row 14. She reached the curtain separating first class from the cockpit corridor. The attendant pulled it aside quickly, urging her on. Her voice dropped low, urgent. "The captain's incapacitated. The first officer's flying alone. He asked for help. If you know anything, you might be able to make a difference." Emily's stomach flipped. Incapacitated. The word landed heavy. She wanted to ask how, why, but the attendant was already pressing her toward the door. Emily's heart hammered as the reinforced cockpit door loomed ahead. It felt like a gateway into another world, one she wasn't sure she had the right to enter. Yet here she was, summoned not by choice, but by silence. The attendant knocked quickly in a coded rhythm. A buzz, then the lock disengaged. The door opened. The first thing Emily noticed was the noise. The hum of the engines was louder here, layered with the constant beeping of alerts and the crackle of radio chatter. The second thing was the captain slumped in his seat, pale, eyes closed, sweat beading on his forehead. Paramedic wasn't there. No one was. He was barely breathing. The co-pilot looked up, eyes bloodshot, voice sharp with urgency. "Do you know controls?" Emily froze in the doorway, terror locking her tongue. "I small planes," she stammered. The co-pilot's jaw tightened. "Good enough. Sit down." Her legs carried her forward before her mind could stop them. She slid into the right-hand seat, the world around her exploding into panels of glowing dials, screens, and switches. It was overwhelming, an entire language she only half understood. Her hands hovered uncertainly near the controls, trembling. The weight of 200 lives pressed down on her shoulders, heavier than anything she'd ever known. The co-pilot leaned close, eyes fixed on her. "Listen to me. Do exactly as I say, nothing more, nothing less. Understand?" Emily swallowed hard, nodding once. "Then let's fly this plane." Emily's heart hammered so loudly she could almost hear it over the alarms. The cockpit was nothing like the small planes of her childhood. Those had been simple dials, a few switches, a yoke that felt alive beneath her fingertips. This was a universe of glowing screens, blinking lights, and warning chimes that made her chest tighten with panic. The co-pilot, a man in his early 30s with sharp eyes and sweat darkening his collar, didn't waste a second. "Hands on the yoke. Just steadier. Don't fight it." Emily hesitated, but then wrapped trembling fingers around the control column. The yoke vibrated faintly, alive with the air currents outside, more powerful than anything she'd ever touched. She forced herself to breathe, to remember her father's words. "Trust the plane. It wants to fly." "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted, her voice raw. "You know more than nothing," the co-pilot shot back, scanning the instruments. His voice was clipped, controlled, but Emily could hear the fraying edges. "That's enough for now." Her eyes flicked to the left, to the captain slumped unconscious in his seat. His breathing was shallow, lips tinged gray. A sick twist gripped her stomach. Whatever had struck him down had been sudden, brutal. If it happened to the co-pilot too, Emily shoved the thought away before it could root. The radios crackled. A voice cut through, calm but urgent. "Flight 237, Boston. Center, confirmed situation. Do you require medical assistance on board?" The co-pilot grabbed his mic. "Boston Center, this is Flight 237. Captain incapacitated. Repeating, Captain incapacitated. I have partial control. Request emergency clearance, priority landing." Static. Then the reply. "Flight 237, Roger. You are cleared direct to Logan. Descend to flight level 350 and maintain. Emergency crews standing by." Emily blinked at the flood of words. To her untrained ears, it was almost another language. The co-pilot rattled back an acknowledgement, then turned to her. "You said small planes?" "Yes," she breathed. "Cessnas. Years ago." "Good enough," he said. "You know pitch, you know roll, you know altitude basics." "Yes, but no buts." His voice cracked like a whip. "You can help, or you can panic. Choose now." Emily flinched, but nodded, swallowing her fear. She forced her hands steady, eyes flicking between the horizon out the windshield and the digital altimeter glowing on the panel. Numbers scrolled, too fast, too bright. She tried to anchor herself to what she remembered. Altitude, speed, heading. "Keep her level," the co-pilot said, his hands flying across the autopilot panel. "That's all I need. Just keep her damn level." The plane shuddered suddenly. A bump of turbulence that rattled the cockpit. Emily's breath caught as the nose dipped. Instinct surged. She pulled gently back on the yoke, just as her father had taught her years before. The horizon steadied again. The co-pilot glanced at her, the faintest flicker of approval in his eyes. Good. Do that. Emily's chest tightened with something unfamiliar hope. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely useless here. But the illusion of control lasted only seconds. An alarm blared, harsh and shrill. Emily flinched. Autopilot's unreliable, the co-pilot muttered, cursing under his breath. His hands blurred across switches, resetting systems, silencing warnings. Sweat ran down his temple. We've got to hand fly this down. Emily's stomach dropped. Hand fly? She barely remembered how to keep a two-seater steady. This jet was a beast, heavy and unyielding. The co-pilot must have seen the panic in her face. His tone softened, just slightly. Listen, this thing's big, but the basics don't change. Wings keep you up. Nose too high, you stall. Nose too low, you dive. Your job is to feel it. Trust it. Emily gripped the yoke tighter. And if I mess up, then we all die, he said. Flatly, her breath caught in her throat. But instead of paralyzing her, the brutal honesty lit a fire inside. There was no room for mistakes. No room for excuses. She nodded once, sharply. Okay, tell me what to do. The co-pilot pointed to the glowing attitude indicator, a screen showing a small airplane symbol against a backdrop of sky blue and earth brown. Keep that line level. Don't let it climb. Don't let it dip. Small corrections only. Emily focused on the instrument, hands trembling, but steady enough to make slight adjustments. The plane responded sluggishly, nothing like the nimble trainers she remembered. But it responded. That was enough. For a few minutes, the cockpit was a blur of noise radios crackling, alarms chirping, the co-pilot's clipped commands. Emily barely heard most of it. She locked onto her task, forcing the little airplane symbol to stay level. The cabin behind them, filled with 200 terrified souls, faded to background noise. But the weight never left her shoulders. She was no hero, no pilot. She was just Emily, a tired consultant who had wanted nothing more than to sleep. And yet here she was, her hands on the controls of a jet hurtling through the night sky. A fresh voice crackled over the radio. Flight 237, we're tracking you. Weather at Logan is stable. Expect runway 27 approach. Confirm you have a qualified pilot at controls. The co-pilot hesitated, eyes flicking to Emily. His lips pressed into a tight line. Then he keyed the mic. Negative. I have assistance from an unlicensed passenger with small aircraft training. Request additional vectors and guidance. Emily froze. Her stomach turned to stone. The entire air traffic system now knew she was here, in this seat, pretending to be something she wasn't. The controller's reply was calm, but there was no mistaking the tension beneath it. Copy that. Flight 237. Maintain heading. We'll get you down. The co-pilot glanced at her again. See? They're with us. You're not alone in this. She let out a shaky breath. But I don't belong here. Neither did I win. I started, he said without looking at her, fingers adjusting switches. Nobody belongs here until they do the work. Right now, this is your work. Emily stared at him, stunned. The words sank deep. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe she could matter. The jet jolted again, pitching slightly left. Emily corrected, hands firm on the yoke. The horizon steadied. Good, the co-pilot muttered. You're flying, flying. The word pulsed through her, surreal and terrifying. She was flying. Her father's voice echoed again in memory warm, patient. Don't fight the air. Feel it. Trust it. She whispered the words aloud, steadying herself. Trust the plane. The co-pilot didn't respond, but for the first time, his shoulders eased slightly. The beeping of alarms softened. The plane held level. The impossible was happening. Emily, the woman from row 14, was keeping 200 lives in the air. The cockpit felt smaller the longer Emily sat in it. The walls seemed to press inward, the glow of the instruments almost blinding in their complexity. The air was warm, tinged with the faint smell of coffee, sweat, and something metallic. Every beep, every flashing light was a reminder that this was not a simulation. This was real, and the weight of 200 strangers rested on her trembling hands. The co-pilot's voice snapped her back. "Nose steady. Don't overcorrect." "I'm trying," Emily hissed through clenched teeth. The yoke vibrated faintly beneath her grip, alive with the push and pull of invisible currents. It was heavier than she expected, stubborn, almost like wrestling a living creature. "Small movements," he repeated. "Think gentle." Emily adjusted, forcing her hands to ease. The horizon steadied again, the small plane symbol on the attitude indicator lining up just where it should. A faint nod from the co-pilot. Better. For a moment, the alarms quieted. The steady roar of the engines filled the silence, a constant reminder of the power they commanded. Emily dared a quick glance at the captain. He hadn't moved, his shallow breaths rattling in and out. The sight jolted her, a grim reminder of why she was here. She tore her eyes away. "Focus," her father's voice whispered again in memory. "Flying is 90% calm, 10% skill. Lose the calm, and the skill doesn't matter." She forced a deep breath into her lungs. But the illusion of calm shattered a heartbeat later. Without warning, the aircraft jolted hard to the right, the nose dipping slightly. Emily gasped, gripping the yoke tighter. The cockpit shuddered with turbulence, loose items rattling in their holders. "What was that?" she cried. "Cross winds," the co-pilot barked. "Ride it out. Don't fight too hard." The plane dipped again, the horizon tilting dangerously. Emily's instincts screamed, but she pulled back and left on the yoke, correcting just enough. The aircraft steadied, though her pulse felt like it might rip through her chest. "Good," the co-pilot muttered, his eyes flicking between instruments. "Not bad at all? Not bad?" Her whole body shook as if she'd run a marathon. The radios crackled again. "Flight 237, Boston Center. You are cleared direct runway 27. Winds at surface calm. Emergency services ready. Advise fuel status." The co-pilot answered swiftly, his voice tight but controlled. Emily only caught pieces. "Fuel sufficient. Expect vectors. Passenger assistance in cockpit." She froze at that last phrase. Passenger assistance. That was her. To the entire air traffic control network. She was just a terrified passenger in row 14, now sitting where she didn't belong. She wanted to melt into the seat, to vanish. But the yoke reminded her otherwise, vibrating with the truth. She was flying. Her throat was dry. "You're really going to let me do this, aren't you?" The co-pilot's eyes snapped to her, sharp and unflinching. "I don't have a choice." The words hit harder than she expected. Not encouragement, not reassurance, just truth. He needed her. Her hands trembled on the yoke. "I can't land this thing." "You don't have to," he said quickly. "Not alone. I'll talk you through every step. But I can't do it without you. 2 hands, 2 brains. We'll bring it down together." Emily's stomach churned. The idea of the landing, the violent rush toward Earth, the roar of wheels meeting runway, terrified her more than the thought of crashing mid-air. She had once sat beside her father during a landing, gripping the edge of her seat as the little plane bounced against the runway. That had been a 2-seater. This was a machine weighing nearly 200 tons. Her voice cracked. "What if I mess up?" The co-pilot's tone softened, just a fraction. "Then we try again if we can. But listen carefully. The worst thing you can do is freeze. Keep moving, keep listening, and we'll survive. Emily drew in another breath. She wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. Behind them sat children, mothers, fathers, people who had no idea how close to disaster they were. If she froze, if she failed, they would all pay the price. A sudden knock startled her, the flight attendant, poking her head in through the cockpit door. Her face was pale, but her voice stayed calm. "How is he?" she asked, nodding toward the captain. "Stable, but out cold," the co-pilot said. "Get any updates on passengers. Keep them calm." The attendant's eyes flicked to Emily, then back. "She's helping?" The co-pilot gave the faintest nod. "She's helping." The attendant didn't question further. She slipped back out, closing the door softly behind her. Emily exhaled shakily. "They're counting on us." "Always are," the co-pilot replied, scanning his screens. "But most never know it." The plane rattled again, lighter turbulence this time. Emily corrected instinctively, her movements smoother now. The co-pilot glanced at her hands and at her face. A ghost of approval touched his expression. "You're learning fast." Emily almost laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. "Trial by fire. That's how most of us learn," he said quietly. Minutes bled into one another. The monotony of steady corrections almost lulled her, but the constant drone of alarms or radio chatter never let her forget the truth. The descent was coming. The approach was inevitable. At last, the co-pilot adjusted his headset, then turned to her. "Okay, we're starting down." Emily's chest constricted. "Now?" "Now," he said firmly. "Air traffic cleared us. We need to descend from 35,000. That's a long way down. You're going to help me manage it." Her grip tightened. "What do I do?" "Throttle back," he instructed, guiding her hand toward the levers. "Not too much. Easy." The engine's roar softened slightly. Emily felt the shift immediately, the nose tilting downward, the horizon sliding up the windshield. Her stomach lurched as gravity tugged. Her breath quickened. "Feels like we're falling." "We're not," the co-pilot assured. "Controlled. Descent. Keep your eyes on the instruments, not your gut. Trust the numbers." Emily forced her gaze onto the altimeter, watching the digits tick steadily downward. Each mile closer to the ground made her pulse race faster. The co-pilot's voice cut through, steady and commanding. "Flaps and stages. Gear on my mark. Runway's 20 minutes out." 20 minutes. That was all the time between her and the impossible task of landing. Her father's words floated back again, soft and insistent. "Flying is trust. Trust yourself. Trust the plane." She whispered them aloud, gripping the yoke tighter. "Trust the plane." The co-pilot gave her a quick, surprised glance, then the faintest nod. Outside the windshield, the night stretched endlessly, stars cold and indifferent. But far ahead, faint against the dark horizon, Emily thought she saw them tiny white dots, lined in precision. Runway lights. Salvation or disaster. The descent had begun. The descent was no longer just numbers ticking downward on a dial. It was a living thing, pressing against Emily's chest with invisible weight. The jet dipped steadily, air currents shifting in invisible rivers around its massive frame. Every vibration rattled through her bones. "Steady hands," the co-pilot reminded her, voice calm but clipped. He spoke like someone balancing the edge of control and disaster. "Ease her. Don't force the nose down." Emily swallowed hard, adjusting her grip. She was still clumsy, but not wild like before. The plane responded, a subtle leveling out, as though it sensed her fear and challenged her to meet it. She whispered, "Just like Dad taught me. Small corrections." "What's that?" the co-pilot asked. "Nothing," Emily said quickly. She couldn't explain not now that her father's ghost was guiding her through every movement. The radio crackled with another voice. Flight 237, Boston Center. You're descending well. Continue vectors for runway 27. Emergency services are standing by. How's the captain? The co-pilot answered smoothly, still unresponsive. First officer handling descent. Passenger assistance in right seat. Emily stiffened at those last words. Passenger assistance. That was her official role in this nightmare. Somewhere far below, trained professionals waited to treat the unconscious captain. But up here, the burden rested on a woman whose only experience came from afternoons in a single-engine plane. Her voice was small. They're all waiting for us. They always are, the co-pilot said grimly. Difference is tonight. You and I are the line between life and death. The weight of his words settled like lead. Emily felt the plane shift again, a pocket of turbulence shaking it violently. A cry of panic escaped her throat, but she caught herself, fighting to steady the yoke. Good correction, the co-pilot said quickly. Don't let it spook you. Planes are tougher than you think. She forced herself to breathe. Her fingers ached from gripping too hard, but she didn't dare ease up. Down below, in the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted. At first, passengers whispered in confusion, some too absorbed in their screens or headphones to process the emergency. But as the descent began, so did the realization. Murmurs spread like wildfire. People craned their necks, peering down the aisles as flight attendants gave hushed updates. In row 14, where Emily's empty seat now sat, a teenage boy stared at the cockpit door. He whispered to his mother, "That lady." She went up there. His mother shushed him, squeezing his hand tighter than she meant to. She didn't want him to know what everyone was slowly realizing, that the woman from row 14 wasn't coming back to her seat. The murmurs grew into prayers, whispered pleas in different languages. A businessman muttered into his phone, recording a voice message he might never send. "If this doesn't go right, I love you. Tell the kids." His words broke, and he shut his eyes tight. The cabin wasn't panicking yet, but fear buzzed through the air, sharp and metallic, like static. Before a storm. Back in the cockpit, Emily tried to shut it out. Her entire world was narrowed to glowing dials, the horizon, and the man beside her. "How much farther?" she asked, voice trembling. 10,000 feet and dropping, he replied. Runways. In sight soon. Her pulse hammered harder. Runway in sight, that meant they were really doing this. There would be no waking from this nightmare, no captain miraculously returning at the last minute. She would have to face the moment where steel and ground met, where the difference between skill and catastrophe was measured in inches. "I don't think I can land this," Emily whispered. The co-pilot turned sharply to her, eyes piercing. "Don't say that. Not here, not now. You've done everything I've asked. You kept her level, corrected turbulence, managed throttle. You're already flying. But landing is just controlled falling," he cut in. "You've been falling for the last 20 minutes. All that changes is wheels. Touch the ground." Emily gave a hollow laugh. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy," he said flatly. "But it's possible. And you're going to help me do it." Her throat closed, but she nodded. She couldn't quit now. Behind them, 200 lives depended on whether she froze or moved forward. The radios crackled again, this time a different voice. "Flight 237, Boston Tower. Winds calm, runway. Lights at full. Emergency crews in position. You are cleared straight in approach. Godspeed." The words hung in the cockpit like a benediction. Emily felt her chest tighten. They were cleared. There was no turning back. The co-pilot guided her through another series of adjustments. Flaps 1, Then flaps too, each movement making the aircraft respond differently. Emily felt the drag, the subtle slowing as the plane prepared itself for the final act. Her body reacted like it remembered the motions, like echoes from those afternoons with her father when he'd let her handle his small plane during landings. Ease her down, Em. Don't fight her, guide her. She blinked rapidly, forcing down tears. Dad, I hope you were right. The co-pilot glanced at her, but said nothing, his attention fixed ahead. At last, he pointed. Look, there. Emily followed his gaze. And there it was straight ahead, glowing in perfect symmetry against the darkness. The runway lights. 2 solid lines stretching into infinity, guiding them like a beacon. Her breath caught. They were aimed straight at salvation. Her voice was barely audible. It's beautiful. The co-pilot gave the faintest smile. It's everything right now. The moment of awe was shattered by sudden turbulence, harder than before. The plane jolted violently, alarm shrieking. Emily cried out, gripping the yoke as the horizon lurched. Correct it. Right hand steady. Don't yank, the co-pilot barked. Her body moved before thought, adjusting just enough. The plane steadied, alarms silencing one by one. Her chest heaved, sweat dripping down her temples. The co-pilot studied her, then gave a sharp nod. You've got instincts. I've got terror, Emily snapped. They're the same thing, if you use it right, he replied. For a few minutes, the cockpit fell into tense silence. Only the rhythmic calls from the co-pilot broke through altitude checks, throttle adjustments, flap settings. Emily followed. Each instruction, her hands stiff but responsive. The lights of Boston twinkled below, sprawling like a constellation. The city was awake, unaware of the drama unfolding above it. Emergency crews lined the runway, red and white lights flashing. In readiness. Somewhere down there, strangers were holding their breath, waiting for the fate of Flight 237. Emily's stomach churned as the co-pilot's tone sharpened. Ear down. Her hand shook as she pushed the lever. A deep mechanical groan vibrated. Through the plane, followed by the thud of wheels locking into place. 3 green, the co-pilot confirmed, eyes on the indicator lights. We're committed now. Committed. The word sank deep into Emily's gut. There was no pulling up, no circling endlessly in the sky. The jet was locked into its path. And that path ended on the strip of glowing lights ahead. Her whisper trembled into the cockpit. 200 lives. 200 people waiting for me not to fail. A co-pilot's reply was firm. Then don't fail. Emily gritted her teeth, forcing her fear into focus. The yoke was warm beneath her hands, alive, demanding trust. She straightened her shoulders, locked her eyes on the runway lights, and whispered one final promise to herself. I won't. The descent was almost over. The landing, the true test, was coming. The lights of Boston stretched like a glittering carpet, but to Emily, they were nothing more than a reminder of how far she could still fall. The plane roared forward, obedient to her trembling hands. Every second dragged like an hour. Every dial and glowing number another voice, screaming at her to get it right. Final approach, the co-pilot announced, his tone clipped, measured. He sounded like he was briefing himself as much as her. Stay on glide slope. Keep it steady. You're doing fine. Fine. That word felt like a cruel joke. Sweat soaked her palms, making the yoke slick beneath her fingers. She wanted to wipe them, just for a second, but didn't dare. If she loosened, her grip, the illusion of control, might vanish. The radio crackled. Flight 237. You are 3 miles out. Winds negligible. Runway 27 clear. You are cleared to land. The word slammed into Emily's chest. Land. Not just descend, not just fly, but land. It was a command as much as permission, and she could already hear the echo of her own panicked protest from earlier. I can't land this. The co-pilot must have seen the panic flicker across her face. His voice softened. Eyes forward. Focus. On the lights. The rest doesn't matter right now. But everything mattered. Behind her, 200 passengers sat suspended between hope and despair. She imagined their faces mothers holding children too tightly, businessmen whispering final words into phones, strangers clutching each other because fear didn't care about names. Her stomach twisted. They were counting on her, a woman who had no right to be here. The co-pilot's voice broke into her thoughts. Okay, flaps 3. Bring her down gently. Her hand shook as she pushed the lever. The sound of shifting metal filled the cabin as the wings adjusted, the aircraft catching more drag. Emily felt the nose dip slightly, the descent rate quickening. Good. Don't overcorrect. Trust her, he said firmly. Trust. The word echoed like her father's voice, as if he were sitting behind her. Trust the plane, Em. She knows what she's built for. All you do is guide her. She clenched her jaw. Okay, trust her. The plane vibrated harder now, air rushing louder against the fuselage. Her stomach dropped as if she were on a roller coaster. She tightened her grip, fighting the instinct to pull up too hard. You're fine, the co-pilot reminded her. Small adjustments. That's it. You've got this. He made it sound simple, but Emily knew the truth. Any mistake now would be catastrophic. There was no altitude left to fix major errors. Suddenly, turbulence hit again. The jet jolted to the side, sending a scream rippling through the cabin. Emily gasped, heart hammering. Correct it just a little left, the co-pilot barked. She did, forcing her hands to move slowly, carefully. The plane steadied, the runway lights back in line. That's it. Don't let it rattle you. Emily let out a shaky breath. She had survived another scare. But how many more could she handle before something snapped? The co-pilot gave quick updates, each one like a heartbeat. 1,000 feet. On slope, looking good. The numbers meant little to Emily, but she clung to the tone of his voice, steady, commanding, unshaken. If he still believed this was possible, maybe she could too. In the cabin, the tension had boiled into silence. People weren't whispering anymore. They were holding their breath, gripping seats, staring at the seatback screens as if they could extract themselves from the reality that a passenger was flying their plane. In row 14, Emily's abandoned seat sat like a ghost. The teenage boy who'd watched her go to the cockpit whispered to his mother, "She's flying us right now, isn't she?" His mother didn't answer. She couldn't. Tears blurred her vision as she silently prayed. Back up front, Emily's whole world shrank to the 2 white lines of the runway and the glowing instruments in front of her. Her body shook, but her hands obeyed. 500 feet, the co-pilot said sharply. Focus, don't drift. The runway was clearer now, so close she could almost feel the pavement rushing to meet them. She gasped, "We're falling." "Too fast." "No," he said firmly. "We're right where we need to be." Hold her steady. Keep your eyes at the far end of the runway. Don't look down. Look forward. Her eyes darted back and forth, trying to obey. The nose wobbled. "I can't." "Yes, you can," he snapped. "Emily, listen to me. You've come this far. You've flown her steady for 20 minutes. You corrected turbulence. You've got instincts most trained people don't. You are not going to lose it now." Hearing her name jolted her. It was the first time he'd spoken it. Emily, not passenger, not assistant, but Emily. Her throat tightened. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll finish this." The plane dropped lower, the ground racing toward them. Every second was now measured. In feet, the runway lights loomed larger, brighter. 200 feet, the co-pilot said. His voice had an edge of urgency now. Start to flare gently. Nose up just a touch. Emily's trembling hand pulled the yoke back slightly. The plane responded, leveling out. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Good. Hold it. Hold it. Alarms chirped. The automated voice of the aircraft filled the cockpit. Minimums. Minimums. Emily's pulse spiked. She whispered, "We're too low. We're going to. Quiet. You've got it." The co-pilot's voice cut through everything. Eyes forward. Hold steady. Wheels down in seconds. Seconds? That was all they had left. The runway filled the windshield now. A rushing strip of salvation and danger. The lights blurred as Emily's eyes burned with tears. She could hear her father's voice again, calm and steady, echoing from years ago. Ease her down. Don't fight. Guide. Her whole body screamed with fear, but her hands obeyed. The co-pilot's voice was a whisper now. Almost there. Almost. There. Emily gritted her teeth, focused on the far end of the runway, and prayed she would not fail. The ground was seconds away. The runway stretched endlessly ahead, white lights cutting through the darkness like pins in a black fabric. Emily's hands shook violently on the yoke, her knuckles white. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, and yet she forced herself to focus, to breathe, to obey. Wheels down, the co-pilot said, calm and measured. 3 green. We're set. Emily's stomach twisted. Wheels down meant commitment. There was no turning back. The jet shuddered as the undercarriage locked into place, a loud metallic thud that reverberated through the cockpit. Flaps full, he continued. Ease her down. Don't overcorrect. Let her settle. The plane lurched slightly, a pocket of turbulence sending it off-center. Emily reacted instinctively, adjusting the yoke with precise, almost mechanical movements. Sweat poured down her face, but she forced her gaze forward, refusing to glance down. Good. Hold her, the co-pilot said. His eyes were locked on the instruments, but the faintest flicker of pride touched his expression. The passengers, meanwhile, were unaware of the exact horrors unfolding in the cockpit. Their nerves stretched tight like piano wires, each vibration of the cabin echoing in their chest. Mothers held children so tightly their knuckles were white. A businessman muttered under his breath, clutching his phone as if speaking final words into it might matter. Emily couldn't think about them. She had no room for anything but the yoke, the instruments, and the runway rushing to meet her. The plane dropped lower. The ground approached faster now. Every foot felt like a heartbeat. Emily's palms were slick, trembling, but she gritted her teeth and kept the yoke steady. Eyes on the far end of the runway, the co-pilot barked. Not down, forward, hold her. Emily's vision blurred. Forward, forward, forward everything, except the final strip of lights vanished. She felt the aircraft's nose lift slightly as she pulled gently back, then corrected as the jet shivered. Almost there. Don't fight her, the co-pilot shouted. The wheels touched the runway with a jolt, a deep, vibrating thud that rattled the cockpit. Emily gasped, half in relief, half in terror. The plane bounced slightly, rising again on the force of its own momentum. Keep her steady, don't let her veer, the co-pilot yelled. Her stomach lurched as she adjusted, hands shaking violently. The runway lights rushed past, numbers flicking on the instruments, telling her the velocity, the descent rate, the altitude. She focused only on the numbers, forcing her fear into calculation. The engines roared, straining against gravity and friction. Emily could feel the massive weight pressing down through the yoke, the plane alive beneath her hands. Every motion, every micro-adjustment, had consequences. The co-pilot's voice was sharp now, clipped with tension. Reverse thrust in 3, 2, 1. Engage. Emily pulled the throttle back as instructed, feeling the jet roar in protest. The ground rushed faster, but the braking systems fought back, slowing the massive aircraft gradually. The plane shuddered and groaned under the strain. "Hold her steady. Keep her on the center line." Emily's arms shook. Her eyes burned. She could feel the sweat dripping into her hair, her uniform sticking to her back. And yet, somehow, the plane obeyed. She guided it like a ghost of her father's lessons, tiny corrections, measured, deliberate. Behind her, the cabin jolted with the impact of the landing. Some passengers gasped aloud, others held hands over mouths, eyes wide in disbelief. The flight attendants gritted their teeth, bracing, guiding terrified passengers, whispering calm assurances they might not even believe themselves. The jet bounced again, and Emily flinched. "We're going to." She started, but the co-pilot cut her off sharply. "Don't finish that sentence. Just hold her." The plane settled onto the runway fully, the massive weight pressing down, tires screeching as friction slowed them. Emily felt the yoke resist, stiffening with each correction. She leaned in, focusing on balance, speed, and alignment. "Good. Keep her straight." "You're almost done," the co-pilot said, voice tense but controlled. Emily's chest heaved. She could hear the roar of engines mixed with the faint hum of alert systems, warning lights that had stopped blinking once she had stabilized the landing. "Brake gently, don't lock wheels." Her hands moved instinctively, a rhythm forming as she eased the brakes. The runway stretched long, fading behind them as the plane slowed. Outside, emergency crews waited, ready for disaster. They didn't need to intervene. Emily guided the jet flawlessly, inch by inch, meter by meter, until finally it rolled to a stop, motionless. A stunned silence fell over the cockpit. Emily's hands fell from the yoke, trembling violently. She could barely breathe. The co-pilot's eyes met hers. For a moment, there was no tension, no fear, just awe. Then he exhaled sharply. "You did it." Emily's knees buckled, and she slumped into the seat. She couldn't speak. The reality of what she had just done hadn't yet fully registered. 200 lives. 200 people alive because she had trusted instincts long buried, because she had faced terror and refused to yield. A moment later, the cockpit door opened. The flight attendant peeked in, eyes wide. Everyone's okay," she whispered. "You did it." The co-pilot shook his head slowly, still in disbelief. "You flew her down. You saved us." Emily finally exhaled, a shaky, ragged sound that seemed to release years of tension in one breath. Tears blurred her vision. I didn't." "You did," the co-pilot interrupted, voice gentle now. "Every single one of them is alive because of you." The cabin began to stir, passengers whispering, crying, laughing with relief. Emily could hear it faintly, a muffled gratitude, the prayers and tears of people who would never fully understand the nightmare they had survived. Her hands still shook, but slowly she let herself lean back, letting the co-pilot take over communications with ground control. She watched through the cockpit window as emergency crews approached, flashing red and white lights, waiting for signs of danger that weren't coming. A deep, quivering laugh escaped her throat. "I can't believe it." The co-pilot smiled faintly. Exhaustion and relief etched across his face. "Believe it. You did it." Emily closed her eyes for a moment, letting the adrenaline drain. She had faced terror above the clouds, guided a massive jet through the unknown, and landed it safely on solid ground. She felt like a ghost walking through the aftermath, still connected to every pulse of life that depended on her hands just minutes ago. Slowly she leaned forward again, helping the co-pilot with final shutdown procedures, as if holding on to duty would make reality less surreal. Around her, the cockpit hummed, no longer with alarms, but with systems settling, engines winding down. Outside, the night sky was quiet now, stars glittering indifferently. The city's lights stretched endlessly, but the danger was over. The impossible had been done. And for Emily, for the first time in hours, or maybe her whole life, she allowed herself to breathe without trembling. The engines wound down with a deep, mechanical sigh, leaving the runway enveloped in an almost eerie calm. Outside, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles reflected off the wet tarmac, but there was no chaos. The crisis had passed. For the first time in hours, Emily could lift her hands from the yoke without feeling as if the plane might pitch again, as if the lives of 200 people still hung by a thread. She slumped into her seat, knees trembling, sweat soaking through her shirt. The co-pilot placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You saved us all," he said simply. No words of embellishment, no platitudes, just truth. Emily swallowed hard, trying to process it. She had faced terror and survived. She had been ordinary, just a passenger in row 14, resting, hoping to sleep, and now she was something entirely different. She had flown a Boeing, guided it through turbulence, landed it safely, and lived to tell the story. The cabin door opened behind them, and the flight attendant stepped in, her face pale but relieved. "Everyone's okay," she said. "You? You did it." Emily's lips trembled. I didn't know if I could." "You did," the co-pilot said again, voice soft now, tired but unwavering. "Every single one of them is alive because of you." Outside, passengers had begun to unbuckle, moving slowly, cautiously, as if emerging from a nightmare. Many of them stared toward the cockpit, knowing, or at least sensing, that something extraordinary had happened inside those walls. Whispers floated down the aisle, the woman in row 14. She flew the plane. Emily's gaze wandered across the cabin. There were tears, trembling hands, quiet sobs. She felt a strange, weighty pride mixed with disbelief. Somehow, she had been enough. Somehow, she had been the difference. The captain, finally conscious, was being attended to by paramedics. His color was returning, though he was weak, trembling. He caught sight of Emily in the cockpit, and his eyes widened slightly. Gratitude, awe, and something else is silent. Acknowledgement of what had been achieved passed between them. Outside, emergency crews guided the plane to a safe parking spot. Passengers began to disembark, many staring, many shaking hands with attendants, the co-pilot, even Emily herself. Some hugged strangers they had never met, as if surviving the crisis had created a bond stronger than familiarity or blood. Emily stepped out of the cockpit finally, her legs weak beneath her. A wave of relief crashed over her, overwhelming her senses. Cameras flashed, not yet for the media, but from passengers who had recorded the moments before landing, documenting history through trembling hands and shaky phones. One mother approached, tears streaming, clutching her child. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my son. You saved my family." Emily shook her head, voice barely audible. I just did what I could." "You did more than anyone could," the mother insisted. She walked down the aisle, a blur of faces, all offering words of gratitude. Emily felt her composure unravel, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The enormity of what had just happened hit her 200 lives, countless families, all intact because she had faced fear instead of running from it. Outside on the tarmac, the lights of Boston Airport glowed against the night sky. Emergency personnel waved her forward, directing her toward a waiting ambulance where paramedics wanted to check her vitals. She laughed softly, a trembling, incredulous sound. "Vitals? I flew a plane. This is nothing compared to that." The co-pilot approached her, carrying a bag of personal items. "You're going to need to sit," he said gently. "Let them check you out. You've earned it. Emily sank into a chair, the physical and emotional exhaustion catching up all. At once, her body shook uncontrollably. She closed her eyes, letting herself feel every shiver, every beat of her racing heart. Reporters arrived soon after, flashing cameras and microphones in her direction. Emily froze. She had never sought attention, never wanted it. But here, in this moment, she realized that the story wasn't about her. It was about the people she had saved, about the passengers who had trusted her, about the crew who had guided her through terror and uncertainty. Her voice trembled as she spoke into the first microphone, keeping her words brief. I was just a passenger. I did what I could. The co-pilot was amazing. He guided me. Without him, none of this would have been possible. And the passengers? Everyone stayed calm, helped each other. That's what saved us. The media swarmed, capturing the image of the young woman who had risen from row 14 to the cockpit, but Emily barely registered it. She felt only a profound sense of disbelief. I did it. I really did it. Hours later, she returned home, wrapped in blankets, silent. The events replayed in her mind endlessly. The jolt of turbulence, the instruments lighting up, the runway lights rushing toward her. She could still feel the weight of 200 lives pressing on her shoulders. But there was also a quiet, warmth, a pride that refused to fade. She had faced fear in its rawest form, and not only survived, but prevailed. The lessons her father had taught her, the instincts she had almost forgotten, had guided her when logic and training were beyond her reach. She had learned something irreversible about herself. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is action. In spite of it, news outlets the next day featured her photograph, the woman from row 14 who saved Flight 237. Airlines praised her bravery. Social media exploded with gratitude and admiration. She read the messages, the letters, the countless notes of thanks. People called her a hero, but she thought of herself differently. She was ordinary. She had simply answered the call when no one else would. Her father called that night, his voice trembling. Emily, I just saw the news. You did it. I can't believe it. I'm so proud of you. Tears pricked her eyes. I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. All those afternoons? I didn't know I was learning how to survive. Nightmare. You did more than survive, he said softly. You led. You saved lives. The weight of those words settled over her, a final, quiet confirmation. She realized then that life could change in a heartbeat, that ordinary moments could become extraordinary, and that courage wasn't something born, it was something summoned. In the moment when everything seemed lost. Weeks later, Emily returned to work, to her normal life, but the memory of Flight 237 remained indelible. She sometimes thought about the passengers, the co-pilot, the captain, and the quiet heroism of all the people who had stayed calm in the storm. She carried it with her, not as fame or recognition, but as a profound reminder of the fragile, precious nature of life and the unexpected capacity within ordinary people to face the impossible. And on quiet nights, when she remembered the roar of engines, the glowing cockpit, the runway stretching into infinity, she would smile softly. Not because she sought glory, but because she had touched the edge of fear and had not let it consume her. She was still Emily, still the woman from row 14. But now, she was also someone who had faced the impossible, guided a jet to safety, and emerged alive with the knowledge that courage can appear in the most unexpected places, at the most unlikely times. And in that knowledge, she found a quiet, unshakable peace.